The conversation around gender, gender equality, gender equity remain a constant conversation that we have in our society. How does it look and how it should look like? Who's affected? Who should be changing their ways of doing things? So today we're having a conversation on gender and transformation. My name is Isasipin Kosim and I am your host here at the MadSoc Connectional. And today we're tackling this conversation. And I would like to first pass my greetings to the Connectional leadership led by Brother Shoneli Class, the constituency of the MadSoc Connectually, the reverends, friends, and everyone who has joined in today on this conversation. And as we are about to start today, I want us to put our hearts and minds together because the conversation we're about to have, as much as it should be theoretical, but it's more sensitive because it touches many lives. And the first thing I would like us to do in order for us to be able to do that, I'll ask Refile to please pray for us, invite God to be with us so that when we're having this conversation, we're not using our own wisdom, but God speaks through us. Refile, please take the floor. Hi, Refile. It seems like the Refile is not around, so I'll do the prayer. May we please bow our head. Motimumura, motimuntate, motimuhalelang. Nangalomzuzu ke Thixo somandla siyakumema nxa siqala this session. Sicela wena ke bawo ube phakathi kwethu. Singenzi ngokokwethu kwazi, kodwa Thixo somandla, get the directive from you. The issue of gender and transformation in this country has been an ongoing conversation, not only in South Africa, but throughout the continent, throughout the globe. And we seem, God, not to find each other. We seem to be in clashes of how it should look like. And it becomes an important aspect then, God, that we invite you to be part of this conversation. Maybe this time around we'll get it right. Maybe we'll find the wisdom, maybe we'll find the answers we've been looking for. Because it might have happened, God, that we've been doing this outside of you. And now we ask you, God, to be the one leading this conversation rather than us leading this conversation. And in that way, Thixo somandla, we won't be left behind by you. Okanye Thixo somandla awuzususa kuthi sibe sizithethela ngokwethu. Cela wena ke bawo nxa siqalayo kuyo yonke into ube nathi. Ze sikwazi Thixo somandla uhlisa imimoya yethu. Sikwazi bawo uba sithethe ngendlela esakhayo ngaphambi ba silwe sikwasodwa. Because this is a sensitive conversation. Kuyathanda Thixo somandla imimoya inyuke. Uzungenelele ke bawo in the midst of all of that. Siyazi ubana apha asilwi siyakha. Instead of Thixo somandla sijongane as enemies, we must look at each other as the allies, Thixo somandla, that are supposed to fight this fight together. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you very much. Miss Minyuku, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Thank you very much for taking your time. I know we just began our session. I should be saying thank you at the end. But on behalf of the Connectional leadership and the constituency at large, they've asked me to thank you for your time, for agreeing to be part of this conversation, give us insight, and allow us to learn from you as young people who are going to be leading this country and who are currently leading the country. So thank you very much for taking your time and be here with us. And without wasting time, I'm gonna give the floor to you to take on the conversation that is one that we need the most, and that is an ongoing conversation. And I love that it's taking throughout the year, not on Women's Month or Women's Day, it's in the middle of October and yet we're still having the conversation, and I love that. And the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me this evening. I am very nervous. I want to start, first of all, by thanking the members of the Southern Africa Methodist Student Society, the Connectional Leadership, as well as the Wesley Guild SA, all of you members who are joining us online on Facebook and on the different feeds, as well as the members that are in the room. I want to thank you for joining us today. And I want to thank you for inviting me. I am very nervous, as I said. I want to start first by declaring my positionality. I'm an African feminist. I'm an equality practitioner. I'm a mother of 5. I am a life partner. I'm a friend, a sister, and a daughter. I'm also a believer, and I'm a Musebetsi who comes from a long line of Basebelets. I'm honored to have been invited to join you in this discussion tonight and to share my perspectives on how to give life to your aspirations to achieve gender and transformation within your society, and I'm hoping broadly within the church and within society. I will start by saying that I'm going to be speaking from my positionality, and when I say that, I mean I'm talking from my experiences. I can only talk about the experiences that I have. But I'm also open and willing to hear about other people's experiences from different perspectives that we can hear from others. That's the first thing that I think is important for you to know. The second thing is that I'm not planning an academic, a theoretical, or even an activist type talk. We all know the extent of the problem of gender-based violence in our society. We all know how gender equality is evading us as a society. And we know how COVID has taken even the benefits of gender equality that we have made historically and set us back years. We all know this. We read this daily in the paper. So I'm not here to build a case for gender equality. I'm not here to build a case as to why we should be taking this work seriously. I'm here because your leadership indicated to me that you already take the work seriously. Your leadership indicated to me that you already are committed. You have set up gender and transformation offices, and you're really trying to break the mold and find the way to make an impact in terms of gender transformation in your society, in the church, and in society broadly. So what I've planned for us tonight is a very interactive engagement. It's an interactive discussion. It is my way of showing you why it is so difficult to do this work. It's my way of showing you what is some of the things that we have to do if we are going to enable our institutions and the people in those institutions to achieve gender equality. So I hope you'll forgive me when I'm not coming at you with stats and when I'm coming at you with questions. What I have set up is I've set up a Mentimeter function, and I will share on my screen Mentimeter. In order to be able to use Mentimeter, you need to grab your smartphone, you need to open your browser, and you'll go to the website. I'll give you the website and put in the code. And then you can put in your answers to the questions that I'm asking, and everyone will see the answers on the screen. The beautiful thing about Mentimeter is we can be open with our thought processes. The reason we can be open with our thought processes is because Mentimeter is anonymous. So no one's going to know if it was Refiwe or Bonginkosi or Kolile who put the answer. No one's going to know who it was who's on the Facebook feed who put the answer. We'll just be able to see what are the opinions and the views and the perspectives of everybody who is sharing in this conversation with us. So that is the method that we're going to use to really learn a little bit more about ourselves, because where I come from and in the work I do, all I'm ever trying to do is to show that gender equality is not an institution's problem. It's not a society's problem. It isn't an individual's problem. It is something that I do that enables or disables gender equality. It is the power and the decisions I make in an institution that enable or disable gender equality in that institution. And it is the actions we take in society as individuals that perpetuate a culture of gender inequality. So really, I'm going to be challenging us at an individual level about what we believe, about what we do, about what we say, to show us where are the spaces, where we can change our belief systems in order to be able to change the outcomes when it comes to gender equality. That being said, I think it's important that although I'm speaking to you as a society, as a student society, you function within a church, within the Methodist church structure, a bigger church structure, university structures in the region, and those function within society. So we will go through a journey of examining how all of those are impacting on what is possible for the society itself, for the student society. We will go through a journey of looking at what society has to say, how that impacts us, what the church has to say as an institution, and how that impacts us, and how that impacts our ability to then implement and enable gender equality. Okay, so that being said, I'd like to dive in by doing a brief exercise with all of the participants. And I'm going to invite everybody who is in the Zoom room, as well as everybody who is on Facebook or any of the live streams that are being done by Wesley Guild and the Contextual, to please join us in this exercise. So I'm also going to invite those in the room to please use the chat consistently to raise their questions. I'm keeping an eye on the chat as we go. So let's dive into the first exercise. I want to invite you to take a visual trip with me. Okay, so when I'm inviting you to take a visual trip, I'm asking you to close your eyes and envision what I am describing. See yourself in the situation that I am describing, and see yourself going through this journey that I'm describing. So let's consider if this conference was taking place in person. And in fact, we were not in a virtual space. We had all decided to gather, and let's say we decided to gather in Cape Town. So let's imagine our journey to get to Cape Town. Each and every one of you starts your journey by being collected by a driver at your home. So a driver comes to pick you up at your home, and the driver takes you to the airport and helps you to take your luggage out of the car. When you go into the airport, you check in at the check-in counter, and then you head straight to your flight because you don't want to miss your flight, right? As you board the flight, an airline attendant comes up to you and says, ma'am, sir, may I please take your bag and put it in the cargo hold because the airplane is full. We can't have too many bags going on board. So someone comes and talks to you about that and asks to take your bag, and they give you the tag and they take your bag. Right. So you get on the flight without your bag, it's been taken. And when you're sitting on the flight, there is a very happy couple behind you, and they are celebrating. They're speaking so loudly and joyously about their recent marriage. So they've recently gotten married. And so you turn around to congratulate this couple. And you're feeling quite happy yourself. It's so lovely to see a young couple find love and find joy, right? So as the flight ends, as you're about to land, the pilot comes and says, ladies and gentlemen, as pilots do, and tells you that you are arriving in your destination ahead of time. And everyone is thrilled that you've arrived safely in Cape Town, and everyone claps their hands. When you get out of the plane at the airport, you get your bag from the airline attendant and you go into the airport. And as you're walking in the airport, an airport attendant comes up to you and asks you, can I help you with your bag? And you ask them to show you where the bus terminus is because you're going to take a bus to the hotel. Okay, so they take you to the bus terminus and there you go. You wait for the bus, the next bus coming in that's taking you to town, and you get on the bus, you greet your bus driver, and you happily and with great excitement take this bus ride to town. So as we're finishing off our visualizing, I want you to open your eyes and I want you to think about how you feel. I'm hoping that everyone is feeling excited about the journey that we are about to take today. And I'm hoping that everyone is feeling excited about the journey that it is to be participating in this space. So as we go on now, I want to ask you a few questions, and I'm going to introduce the mentee as I ask you the question. So I'm going to screen share the mentee and explain to you how the mentee works, right? And then it's going to have a number of questions. So to screen, you will see on the screen what is your mentee sheet. And if you can go to www.menti.com, if you go straight to that website, it will ask you for the code. And then if you can use the code 43856132. I'm going to ask one of the leadership to please just put the Menti code in the chat as well, in case people are having trouble seeing the link. I will also try and share it in the chat. So let's answer the questions one by one. The first question is, in your imagination, what was the gender of the driver who picked you up at home? I see only one person has answered. I am going to, I'm putting the Menti code into the chat for those of you who can't pick it up. Okay, I see some people are also putting responses in the chat. So they are 17 of us, 16 of us on the call. So I'm going to ask if at least 16 of us answer this question. The people who have joined the online call, if all of you can please try and get onto the Menti and let's answer this question. And remember, this is just to help us learn about ourselves, because as I said, the biggest barrier to gender equality is not the institutions, but the individuals. Okay, I'm also trying to just keep track of what's happening in the chat as we go along. We've got 3 responses now. Okay, I'm going to move our slide along. Those of you who are still catching up with us, you will be able to access the first slide and then you will see the second slide. So the second slide is asking you, what was the race of the flight attendant, of the airline attendant? So the airline attendant was the one who came to ask you, can they take your luggage and put the luggage away? Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to keep us moving. Those of you who are still catching up, you'll be able to follow with us. Please just start from the first Menti because we're going to go back and review. And then the next question is, what was the sexual orientation of the happily married couple? Okay, just a few more questions, and I'm asking us to keep with it. Just stick with me as we do this exercise. What language did the pilot speak when they announced that we have arrived ahead of time and we've arrived safely in Cape Town? And then the last question is, how old was the bus driver when you got onto the bus? Okay, I see everyone's catching up. And also we have Samantha in the chat who is giving the answers in the chat. So I just want to review some of our answers. And this is an exercise that everyone can join. So I want to take us to the beginning. So When we talked about the driver, everyone who answered assumed that the driver was male, right? When we talked about the airline attendant, some of them felt that the airline attendant was white, others felt that the airline attendant was Black. When we talked about sexual orientation, the couple, everyone thought it was a heterosexual couple. When we talked about the pilot, everyone saw the pilot speaking English. And when we talked about the bus driver, almost everyone saw the bus driver as someone between 40 and 50. I think Sipamandla there in the chat had actually put 25 to 30 years old. So the point of this exercise is to show that every single one of us holds stereotypes in one form or the other. There's no one who's exempt, and there's no one who's better when it comes to stereotypes. And knowing this should really help us preparing for this discussion, because it helps us to disarm. It helps us to know that we don't have to defend ourselves. We don't have to show that we are the good guy. And that's a really important tool when we're doing gender equality work. When we're doing equality work of any kind, you have to be prepared to know that you hold stereotypes and that your stereotypes might create problems for other people, might create problems for the people who are on the receiving end of your stereotypes. Right. So I'd like to invite you, now that we all know that all of us hold stereotypes, I'd like to invite everybody to just disarm, to relax, to enter the discussion from the point of view that no one is better than anyone. And this is not a competition. This is about what do we do with the fact that as human beings, we hold stereotypes. When I do my work, we actually teach that biologically, we hold stereotypes. We hold stereotypes because it is important for our biological safety for us to be able to assess people quickly. And so we create all of these boxes and we assess and we put people into boxes quickly to make a quick assessment of who we're dealing with for our safety as people. So there's nothing that is particularly wrong with holding stereotypes. The big problem is that we judge the value of a person according to those stereotypes. So, for example, an airline attendant who is Black, you would also make certain kind of class judgments about them. A driver who is a male also leads you to believe that, well, women don't drive, or women don't drive well, or women don't drive enough. So the problem with stereotypes is not their existence, but how they begin to impact our belief systems. So in my work, what I want is to help everybody to realize that we do hold stereotypes. And the thing about stereotypes is they are taught, in that they're deliberately taught in the ways that we're brought up in social institutions, in our families, in our communities, in our schools, even in our religious institutions. The other thing about stereotypes is that they are caught. And we say they're caught in that we learn them from our peers, from the media, from social media. So, and the biggest difficulty now about social media and the internet is that it reinforces your own belief system. So when you're on social media, what you speak about, what you value, what you like is the same thing that social media continues to feed to you. So our stereotypes are perpetuated by the ways that they are caught, by who we hang out with, by what we watch on the media, by what we do on social media. So in a sense, we're living in a society where stereotypes are getting stronger and stereotypes are getting harder to overcome. And yet that's exactly what we must overcome if we want to have gender equality. That's exactly what we must overcome if we want to have any form of equality. If we're honest with ourselves, when we hold stereotypes about any different group, stereotypes about sexual orientation, those stereotypes are all about who is seen as valued and who is seen as not valued, right? Those stereotypes are all about who is seen as matters and who doesn't matter. Those stereotypes are all about who we can listen to, who we can follow, and who we don't listen to, who we marginalize, who we push to the edge, who we don't see and recognize in society. So that's the problem with stereotypes. And if we have them, what we need to do is challenge them. Now, it's very difficult when we begin to look at gender, because we must acknowledge that our gender stereotypes are very deeply embedded. We are taught them when we are very young. I would suggest sometimes taught them even before we are born. Whether you're talking about the baby showers that your parents must have had when many of you were born, or you're talking about the gender reveal parties that are fashionable today, people are put into the boxes of male and female very early on in their life, sometimes before they're even born. And with that label comes a range of expectations about how you must behave, about how you can behave, about how you must interact in the world, and about how you can interact in the world. So let me share a story, a personal story, to give you a sense of how this works. When I was pregnant with my first child, her father and I argued extensively about a suitable name for her. I wanted to name the child Nuru, which means light or dawn in Swahili. The father refused. He argued that a boy cannot be called Nuru. So you see, we had done this thing. We had decided not to get a reveal of our baby's gender, our baby's sex. So we hadn't asked what the baby's sex is, and we had told the doctors not to let us know. But he was convinced he was going to have a boy. So he refused with that name Nuri. He said, no ways. A boy can't be named Nuri, so we can't have that name. And so by the time I went to give birth to my first child, we didn't have a name for the child. We didn't have a name because he was still insisting that that baby was a boy. And I was thinking, no, but she could be a girl. So when she arrived, she was a beautiful girl. And the father was very disappointed and decided no on this Nuru name of mine, and decided to name her Malaika. So when Malaika was born, and as we raised her, we were deliberate about trying not to force her into any gender identity. So she was that one kid who wore yellow and orange and green, do the blue and the pink. And we tried to expose her to as wide activities as possible. She spent a lot of time with her father and with her mother. But the truth about it is she still grew up in a house where mommy cooked. She still grew up in a house where mommy did the laundry. She still grew up in a house where her father got into a car and left to go to work every day. So even as a newborn baby, she would have been aware and would have noticed these patterns of behavior. Even as a small child, 1 or 2 years old, she would have noticed that no, dad's never here during the day. He goes to work. Mom is the one who always makes me meals, right? So she would have noticed those patterns despite our best efforts not to apply any particular gender identity to her. So we worked very hard at it. And at age 3, Malaika went to preschool. And within a few days of being at preschool, she came back and explained to us that she's a girl and she definitely needs more pink fairy dresses. So the reason I'm telling this story is to show that even with our best efforts, gender is so deeply entrenched in society. Gender stereotypes are so deeply entrenched in society that a child can learn about them even outside the scope of their own parents. Because it's not just parents who teach us. We'll also learn what we see in society, what we see on TV. We catch it when we're visiting at a friend's house and we see the relationships in those friends' houses. But the truth of the matter is, in most families, if you think about your own family, your parents were not deliberately trying to make a gender neutral upbringing for you. In most families, parents are not thinking about gender neutrality. In most families, parents are living out gender stereotypes all of the time and in many different ways. And what this means is that by the time we enter the church space, we have pretty solidly entrenched gender stereotypes. We have a good understanding about what a man is and what a woman is. We have a good understanding about what a girl is and what a boy is. And all that the church is really doing is that the church is building on a foundation that already exists. So this is the reason why it is not useful for us to talk about gender equality and think we can only do it by working outside of ourselves. It's not useful for us to say, okay, we're going to put in quotas in the church. It's not useful for us to talk about we're going to put in this structure or that structure. We have to look at our own belief systems. So what I teach in the work I do is that if we want to change and we want people to change their behavior, for example, when I was being briefed for this session, some of the questions you were asking yourself is, why is it that we still have majority male leadership? If you want people to change their behavior and change who they vote for, then you have to get them to change what they believe. That is what I'm trying to show you. And what they believe is not only defined by the church, it's defined from when they're very young, from even before they are born. It is defined in their families, in society, in communities. So if we can get to accept and grapple that that is the depth of what we are dealing with, and it is individual work that each and every one of us has to take. If you're going to say I'm leadership, then you as leadership are going to have to look at your belief systems if you are wanting to see gender equality take place in your student society. If you are wanting to see gender equality take root in the church, it has to start with you. And you have to be able to lead by example and help others to also question their own belief systems. You have to recognize that the belief systems are far deeper than what we teach in church. So that's the first thing I want us to understand. The second thing I want us to understand is still, even as difficult as it is that gender stereotypes perpetuate and live in us from when we're very small, we then go into a church system where churches perpetuate gender inequality. And we know that historically, the church has done a lot of work in order to demonstrate what we call patriarchy. And patriarchy is the belief system that men are superior to women. So the church has done a lot of work within its own structures, within its own belief systems that it's teaching to show that women are less. Some of them would be the belief systems around whether or not women can lead and can preach. Some of them would be belief systems around whether women can baptize. Some of them would be belief systems, just the basic from the book of Genesis, that the woman is the one who led us into sin. And all of these belief systems are perpetuated through our preaching in the church on a weekly basis if you're a weekly goer to church. It could be on a daily basis if you are that believer. It is sitting in our Bible, and depending on how we read our Bible, how our Bible is explained to us, how our Bible is framed for us, everything is signaling that women are less. And if that is the signal that we're getting, on top of our social upbringing about women are different from men, on top of our social upbringing about what are the roles that women should be playing, it is inevitable that women as leaders will not be trusted. It is inevitable that our beliefs will not allow us to give women leadership positions because we don't believe they can play that role. So it's important to look at the history of the church, to understand that within church preachings, within church structures, we have already set up a system that means women are less. And if we want to undo that system, then we have to be a little bit more courageous about asking ourselves the hard questions. So I'm going to move to our next mentee. And here, this mentee is an open mentee, and you can put in your own submissions. And I want us to make submissions about what are the characteristics of an ideal leader in our student society. Because the challenge that was put to me was, we have these gender and transformation officers, but we don't see a transformation in the leadership of our own student society. We don't see a transformation in the leadership of the institutions that we're wanting to change. So what do you guys believe are the ideal characteristics of a leader? I want you to go back to Menti, and if you can just refresh your screen, you should be able to get this next slide. What are the characteristics of an ideal leader? I don't see any submissions coming through. If I can just get feedback in the chat or in the Menti. If you are able to access the Menti in the chat. Is everybody still with me?
Yes, ma'am. I'm doing it on my side.
Okay. So we'll see some of the feedback coming through. What do you truly believe are the characteristics of an ideal leader? And here, I don't want you to filter yourself. I don't want you to judge yourself. I want you to really examine your belief systems. So some of the submissions we've got coming up is inclusive, assertive, vocal, diverse, progressive. Are there any other submissions coming through?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'm just going to move us along to the next slide and ask you again to please get onto www.menti.com and to use the code 43856132 so we can hear some of these views. So if those are our views of what the ideal leader is, what are the characteristics of an ideal man? And again, I'm going to invite you to be truly honest. What are your characteristics of an ideal man in society, in your society, in your student society, in your church? How do you characterize an ideal man? Pamela has put in the chat, they focus on developing others and encourage innovation. I don't know, Pamela, if that is the ideal man or the ideal leader. If you could just let me know. Okay, I'm going to wait for submissions to come up and then we'll move on to the last slide. So these point to the ideal leader. Okay, Pamantla, let us know what the ideal man looks like. So the ideal man is intelligent, bold, masculine, conservative, spiritual. Yeah. And then the last slide is asking us what are the characteristics of an ideal woman? Pamantla has put in the chat, an ideal woman is intelligent, caring, and supportive. I'm just gonna wait again for submissions to come up. Okay, I don't know, I'm in the, oh, here they are. Supportive, decisive, maternal, innovative, and progressive. Okay, so what I would like us to recognize is some more trustworthy, honest, assertive, reliable, respectful. So what I would like us to recognize is the difference between the ideal man and the ideal woman. When we're talking about the ideal woman, we see words like supportive. We see words like respectful. We see words like maternal. And all of those may be true of the characteristics of an ideal woman. But the thing is, those are not characteristics of an ideal leader, right? So if we go back to an ideal leader, what we see in the characteristics of an ideal leader is we see things like assertiveness. We see self-awareness. We see vocal. Vocal is something that if you are quiet, if you are supportive, if you're playing that kind of role, you're not going to be assertive. You're not going to be vocal. And then we also do see the alignments like respectful and honest and self-aware. I think what I was wanting to demonstrate with this exercise is that really, when we think of an ideal leader, ultimately, we do think about an ideal man. We think about an ideal man, and we have been taught within our church structures that a good leader is a leader that is a man who can do all of the things that we have added. And it's important for us to acknowledge that, because if we don't acknowledge that, we're not going to begin to do the work of undoing that. Now I want to jump into what are the things that can be done to undo that. It was shared with me that you do have gender and transformation officers, and that their key jobs is to develop education programs around gender, to collate and disseminate resources on the role of gender in the church and society, to do policy matters that relate to education and transformation, and then to be responsible for educational health awareness, such as HIV/AIDS. So what I will hope you will have seen through the journey that we've taken today is that the problem resides within people. And if the problem resides within people, people then build and perpetuate institutions that do not have gender equality. People build and perpetuate institutions that are not transforming in terms of the gender equality ideal that you as a society have set out for yourself. So some of the challenges that you have set up for your gender and transformation officers in and of themselves are so difficult because they have to address their own belief systems, and then they have to address the belief systems of everybody else who is involved in the student society, who's involved in the church. And without doing that, they're always going to come against a hard wall. They're always going to come against questions. They're always going to come against difficulties in fulfilling their roles. So there's nothing wrong with the roles that you have set out. The difficulty, though, is that if the individuals who have to live in that reality are not accepting, you're not going to be able to do that work. If the structures of the church reality are not accepting, you're not going to be able to do that work. And when I talk about structures, I'm talking, for example, about the ideas and the structures around, and I wouldn't know, I'm not sure what they would be called in the Methodist Church. In my belief traditions, you call them o mañana or o mama. So the Thursday structure. And the Thursday structure for Bomme is built around service. It's built around this idea of the ideal woman, the woman who is humble, who is servicing, who is supportive, that the activities they do are around building those characteristics. If you think about Baritswana, the activities that they do are around building these characteristics. They're not around building the leadership characteristics. They're not around building boldness. They're not around building assertiveness. They're not around even building kind of a theological capability. And if you want leaders in a religious context, they have to have a theological capability. They have to have a theological strength. They have to be able to engage on theological matters as well. So that's what I mean, that even the structures as we set them up, where when I go to church, Baretsana will speak on Father's Day. And then that's it. That's the only time they will ever be given the podium, you know? And so where is then the opportunity to develop the leadership, the ability to speak on spiritual matters and to guide others on spiritual matters, the confidence and the assertiveness to stand up for your arguments in a theological context when you have no space to practice that kind of leadership all of the time? So in that sense, I'm trying to show you that in as much as we have an individual problem, we also have a structural and institutional problem. So I'm getting to the end of my talk now, and I'm conscious of time because I'm sure that there are a number of questions. The things that I want to suggest that can be done. It is important for us to look at what we consider leadership qualities. And if we are saying inclusivity is a leadership quality, it was here on the screen, if I recall. If we're saying inclusivity is a leadership quality, then how are we measuring inclusivity by the people who are in leadership? And the reason I ask that is because part of inclusivity is creating the space for women to enter the space, is sponsoring and mentoring women, is creating opportunities for women. That's how you build women's leadership. If you build women's leadership in and of itself, it will easily be able to come forward with ideas. They will easily be able to come forward and stand equitably at the front because they've had the same opportunities and equal opportunities to grow within the institution, within the society, within the church. So that's the second thing that I want to say. If we're saying this is our idea of good leaders, then we must measure leaders by this. Leaders must be accountable by this. And part of that means, what are you doing around gender equality? The second thing is you must build women's leadership. You must create the opportunities for women. You must create opportunities for them to preach, for them to learn, for them to speak, for them to organize and to work within the space that they are being asked to take leadership in. You must give mentorship and sponsorship. That means opportunity after opportunity to learn, to grow. And it's important to continue to have role models. I know in the Methodist Church, you've got Bishop Purity Malinga. You need more and more role models. Seeing is believing. When you can see that you can get there as a young woman, it builds your confidence. It builds your ability to continue to prepare to stand for these positions that you're wanting to see women fulfill. It's important as individuals to challenge your own belief systems. So to stretch yourself, to talk to people who are different. Every single one of you thought of a married couple as a heterosexual couple. How are you engaging with homosexual communities? How are you engaging with the LGBTI community, to people who are different from you, so that you can expand your belief systems? I'm not saying you must change them. I'm saying you must expand them, let them grow in order to accommodate differences. And when you can do that, you'll begin to defeat this binary of the male and female that you have been taught so early in life. It's important to challenge the belief systems within the church. So one of the ways is to do contextual biblical studies, have contextual biblical workshops. There's an amazing group of women led by Dr. Nontando Hadebe, the Circle of Concerned Women of African Theologians, and there's a side-by-side program. So there are immense programs that have done this work. It's about giving them platform and space, in your church, on your podium, so that they begin to challenge the belief systems of everyone within the church system. And lastly, it's about changing the structures. So how are you infusing leadership into the Omanyano structures? How are you infusing leadership into the Barwetsana structures? How are you infusing gender equality into the men's structures? These are the questions that you need to ask yourself. And those are the low-hanging fruits that if you're making an intervention, you can begin to see a shift in the needle of gender equality. So that is it from me. I am open to questions and to engagement and discussion. I do have one last Menti slide, which is really for you guys to make submissions about what you think institutional support is required in order to drive gender transformation. So there's lots of institutional support. It may just be the resources to have the workshops. It may be the resources to have the women's leadership camps and the women's leadership opportunities. All of those kinds of resources, you want to be identifying them so that you can pursue them within your own institution, because without the institutional support, it just stays an ideal. That is it from me. I'm going to hand back to the chairperson and I will be happy to answer questions.
Can you see me? And can you hear me? Ms. Minyuku, I'm lost for words. I'm a gender activist myself, and I'm sitting here thinking, the perspective has always been different. It has always been about theory. It has always been, I mean, if you had addressed your topic in a theoretical framework, there'll be a million questions. But now there are no questions because I'm sure everyone is looking at themselves and thinking, hang on, I've been part of the problem all this time around, and how do I then engage on that? So please don't see ourselves not having questions for you as a way of not engaging your topic, but rather I think this is a shock in our system, because I've been to different talks on gender, and to be honest, the perspective has never been like this. It has been many different things, but it has never went to the home. Because when you started and you were talking about your daughter, seeing you as a person who cooks, you were already teaching her that this is your place in the world. And without even you saying that, as intentional as you were to bring a different perspective altogether to her, but within that, you had already set the standard. And her going to school, and it reminded me of Chimamanda on We Should Be All Feminists, when the teacher had set the rule that anyone who passed the test will be a class monitor. And the person who passed the test was a girl. And the teacher was like, no, we then have to take the person who was second, which was a boy. Because the perspective has always been the monitor has to be a boy. And the idea was that there'll be no girl who passed to that extent. So the teacher didn't think of it to that extent that, oh, there'll be a girl who passed more. But now the teacher was confronted with the situation of, oh, this is different from what the system teaches us, that women will be at the back. Actually, there's a girl who's more smarter than the rest of the class, but they still needed to accept the society order. And so you see it in those small situations as you bring it into our attention. And then lastly, it reminds me of when I was reading on gender neutrality in Sweden, and they were narrating a similar story as you were narrating, but it was to kids that this person has a multi-billion dollar company, and they drive a Mercedes Benz, and they live in a penthouse. They CEO of a gender. What's the gender of the person? And the kids was like, it definitely has to be a male. And there was no idea in them on that it could be different. And for us to think that the couple was a heterosexual couple speaks into our own internalized socializations of what society has taught us over the years, and many other things. So I think this was a shocking way of looking at gender. And I think for many of us, we just need to first just check back and just think of what is going on. Because as I was preparing for the session, I looked at South Africa specifically from the first time post apartheid, the first time we had vote. On the MPs we had, it was 27.7%. Second time we voted, it was 30%. Third time, it was 33%. Fourth, it was 43%. Fifth, it was 40%. There was a decrease, but there was an increase on the last election. It was 46%. This is now women in parliament as MPs. But then the question still remains, what does this mean? Does it change the status quo? Because I had that question in mind of, when we're looking at gender transformation, are we looking at it in the quantity side, 46% women are representing us, or are we looking at it, the quality of life of women, socially, economically, in terms of leadership? Because it's one thing to have 46% of women representing us, but I still fear going outside because it's not safe. When the expectation would have been that the woman will advocate for more policies that put me safe. But is it fair to put that on them if the structural system does not allow them to make sure they push for those policies? So it's a catch-22 situation that we find ourselves in, that in terms of quantity, yes, there's the country, but in terms of quality, it's a different topic altogether, which is just what you brought to us of in terms of quality of life now, the teachings and everything. On both ends, there's no questions, both on the connectional side and on the Wesley Girls side. And like I said, it's all a shock in our system. But I would have loved to pose that question to you, that when you look at gender equality and equity, at what lens are we looking at it?
Thank you for the question. So, I mean, I do this work on a daily basis, and there always is that moment of shock. There always is that moment of defense. Wait a minute, that's not me. I'm a good person. A lot of people do that, but we have to understand that the institutions we have are the institutions that we built, and we keep going, we perpetuate. And so it's important for us to take that time to realize that there is enough in me that's keeping things the way they are. Where are the parts of me that are going to make change? If you're talking about transformation, you're talking about change. And for change to happen, there has to be a bigger drive in you to change than to keep things the same. And so that's why I'm on people's studios the way that I am, because I'm asking, is the drive there for transformation, or are we just talking? When you ask a question about, representation, and I said representation is important. It's important to be able to see that that is a possibility. Representation does change the narrative in society, but it doesn't change the belief systems. It doesn't go deep enough to change the belief systems. In order to be able to change the belief systems, that representation has to have different outcomes. And that's the crux. And I mean, your example about the South African parliament, where it's 46% women, we've got 50% women on cabinet, but it took hundreds and thousands of women in South Africa to go out on the street to get gender-based violence to be put as a priority by our government. So it means that being in the position doesn't necessarily mean that you can drive the transformational change if you haven't done the individual work. So so every single one of those MPs has to also be gender transformed if they're going to be willing to fight the fight for gender transformation. Every single one of those cabinet ministers has to be gender transformed if they're going to fight for gender transformation. They're not going to do that fight just because they're women. And that's the important thing for us to see. No one is having the fight just because we have made a theoretical agreement about it. People are having the fight when they come to believe within themselves and in their bodies that we have to change. And it's only at that point that you're going to fight without stop, that you're going to be like the hundreds of thousands of women that took to the street in 2019. I was newly pregnant. I'd given birth to my baby 6 weeks before, but I went onto that street and I met mothers who had left their babies with the fathers for the first time in their lives to go onto the street to say, we want gender-based violence addressed with. So you have to hit that tipping point that, you know what, it's enough and it has to change. And when you hit that tipping point as a leader, as an individual in an institution, as an MP, as a cabinet member, that's when we begin to see the social transformation that we want.
Sure. This Minyuku, that is a different perspective altogether. Because as I'm sitting also, I'm also thinking that he's saying for the first time, those mothers left the kids with the fathers. And it goes to the question of, despite us being educated and everything else in between, the roles remain the same. So how do we then change a society if I'm going to say one thing, that I'm for gender and everything else, but still conform to the same gender issues that I'm against? So I go on and say, I want to be free, I want to be equal and everything else, but I go back and cook and everything. Not to say that is a problem, but it's a question of choice. Do I really want to do that as a woman? Is it out of my own choice to want to cook for my husband Monday to Friday, or am following his standard? Is it my choice to want to have a child, or is it because it's inevitable once I get married? Those are the nuances that we're having around the issue of gender and gender transformation. And as I was looking into the topic and preparing for it, I was thinking of the whole thing around glass ceiling now that is popular in banks, in the industry of banks. And I was thinking of that for the first time in the existence of the MCSA in 2020 or 2019, when Bishop was inaugurated as the presiding Bishop Mamu Malinga. It was the first time. The MCSA has been in the continent for decades, but 27 years into democracy, it was only after 24 years that we're having the woman as a presiding bishop, and she's the first in all these years. And I'm looking at post-democracy because it would have been impossible pre-democracy. But you're still looking at the fact that it took us almost over 24 years to get to the point of saying, oh, yes, we can have a presiding bishop that is a female. And how does that look like for us? Yes, in terms of representation, but how do we look at it differently from issues of glass ceiling? What is happening when that decision was made? Was there an uproar in the church of women not being represented? And there was a sudden need of, okay, we need to give them a position. I'm not accusing the church of that, but those are some of the questions that we need to ask ourselves. That yes, it's all good and well to say a person is the first to be that, but what are the circumstances that led them to be in that position? In order for us to see it, is it really about representation in its purity? And would that person be allowed an opportunity to expand the division or department that they're in? Or it's a matter of representation because the company or the organization is under scrutiny for not having women in representation. So I think it speaks a lot of our internalized thinking around gender, as you had mentioned, because I still sit here and still question all of those things when a woman has to be elected. There's a question on our chat box here on Zoom from Basetsana. How do we tackle gender-specific roles that are innate, e.g. giving birth, without contributing to further societal expectations pinned against women? For example, in this journey of gender, in this journey of gender transformation.
Thank you again for the questions. So I just want to start with the questions that you raised. And this is why this is an important conversation to have with men, and with men being in the space, because it is not enough for women to say, I want my freedom. They partners, they brothers, they fathers are also going to have to fight for them to have that freedom. And so a man who is a partner is going to have to make a deliberate choice about, I'm building a different future. So yes, I'm going to cook. I'm building a different future. So yes, I'm going to change nappies. So when I told you about our efforts to raise Malaika in a gender neutral home, her father went to work every day, but the minute he got back home, he did all the care work. So nappy changing, everything. He did everything, and I would then relax. So even though there was a lot she learned about gender roles, there was also a lot she learned about nurturing, and that nurturing can come from both a mother and a father. It can come from a male and a female. She also learned that, no, even my dad can cook. So there's deliberate choices that you make within a relationship that are about, we're building a new world, a new society. That's why I say each and every one of us has to reach that tipping point that says, no, I have to change. I have to do something different. So that's the first thing. And then this question about specific roles that are innate, e.g. giving birth. So that's a challenging question for me. And it's challenging because I don't know how far to take it, right? Thinking about the church space, you can take it very far. I don't think that giving birth is innate to any particular gender. Gender is a social construct. And what we have come to learn is that it's not innate. It's not innate. When we expand our knowledge and understanding, we're able to see instances of men giving birth. We now live in a world where trans men give birth. We now live in a world where men breastfeed. So again, in creating a gender neutral upbringing for Malaika, both her father and I were in charge of feeding. I had the breast, but when I was resting, he had the breast milk in a bottle. So there isn't any genderized role that is innate. There is an ability in each and every one of us to do particular things. And this is what I mean about expanding our knowledge systems. So anyone from the trans community will tell you easily that you don't have to be. That it is not linked simply to your gender. You don't have to be a woman to give birth in the day and times that we live in now. And that is part of how society is breaking, is pounding at this construct of gender. This construct of gender is something that we have created as human beings. It is not real in and of itself. What is real is sex, is the physiology of our sex identity, right? Our physical identity. But gender itself is not a real construct. And so I see there's an echo.
Sorry.
So none of us then are entrapped by the choices that we make. We just have to be courageous enough to fight for the choices that we make. We have to surround ourselves with a community that fights for the choices that we make. And I know that that's very, very difficult and very challenging. I am a woman. I'm a woman in this society. So I know how difficult it is to fight for the choices that you make and to fight in a society where not everybody shares that belief system. But that's why we're doing the work. And if we're not demonstrating that it is possible, then we're losing the debate, we're losing the race before we start without demonstrating that it's possible. So for Basizana, I would say demonstrate that it's possible for me to birth a child and not have to be the person sitting home looking after the child. Demonstrate that in your life and fight for that space. That's the only way that we can do it.
Thank you very much, Ms. Minyuku. To Basetsana, I'll suggest you watch a recent series by HBO on sins in a marriage. It actually shows where the man is the primary nurturer into the marriage, and the woman is the one who's doing the work and everything, because she was a top executive in the company and the guy was in academia, so he had a flexible schedule than her, and they made a decision that he becomes the primary caregiver and she becomes the one who provides financially, because she was also earning more, which is a different dynamic altogether in terms of relationships. So I'll suggest you watch that series. It's a very triggering and very worth watching series, especially for debate in the 21st century around gender roles and relationships and how they look like. Ms. Minyuku, from our side, it doesn't look like there's any question. And this was a very insightful conversation for anyone who's interested in gender and understanding of the work starts with us. The work is more internal than more than it's external. Whatever that is external is a result of our internalized socialization of how gender should look like. And I was snapping fingers when you said gender is a social construct. And if we understood that gender from that perspective, then we would realize that the power of changing that is still within us. We can still construct it differently altogether. So thank you very much for being with us today. We really appreciate your time. We really appreciate those engagements. And I would like to give the platform to you if you had words of closing before we do a prayer.
Thank you so much. I want to thank you for agreeing to journey with me and for being willing to be self-examining and self-reflective. I know that it's not easy at all, but it is the necessary work if we want to see the change and transformation we want in society. The one thing I wanted to leave with is that it is not sexy to be the only, and it is not sexy to be the first. When you mentioned just the reality of Bishop Malinga, it is difficult to be the first. You have to understand and acknowledge that when you are the first, it means that the institutional and the structural is not set up for you at all. The institutional and the structural doesn't understand and respond to you. And it's like beating a pathway in the jungle. There is no road, and you're the person who's building the road. So it's a very difficult task to be the first. And it's the same when you are the only. It is a lonely task. So it's important that if we're talking about gender transformation, we take away this label of the first and the only as if they are amazing achievements. They often are so undermining and so pressureful for that person who has to hold the role that ultimately we even lose that person in the system. And it's important to know that part of gender transformation is creating a community of support around the person who becomes the first, around the one who is the only, and ensuring that more and more join the ranks instead of keeping it at one only. So that would be my final message to you. Let there be many more Bishop Malingas. Let them start right here in the Student Society and in the Wesley Guild. Let them start by pursuing their own leadership and their own understanding of what their role is, transforming this society, the Methodist Church, and society in general. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Minyuku, for your time. And as I'm closing, may I please ask Brother Fenelikaya to close in prayer for us. I'll give you just in a second to close in prayer for us. Thank you very much for taking your time, ma'am, once again to be with us and teach us a different perspective altogether. I think all of us will take to the day time to reflect on our own doings, and hopefully we will then see the parts that we need to change in terms of our own thinking, how we engage our own prejudices that we're having as a people, even those of us who believe we are in the fight and that we doing okay and we on the right side of history, even as we have a lot of working to do for ourselves, because some of the things that we do are unconscious to us of the internalized teachings of society. Brother Fenelikai, may you please close for us in prayer?
Okay, thank you very much. Let us pray. Lord, you are great. Lord, you are worthy to be praised. Thank you, Lord, for this moment. Thank you, Tikom Shotumengo Kulunga, for this moment. Thank you, Lord, for speaking to us through your servant, Tikom Shotumengo Kulunga. Thank you, Malusolungleyo, for the life of Miss Minyuku, Tikom Shotumengo Kulunga. Malusolungleyo, we may have not spoken or engaged much simply because we have been challenged to the core. And thank you for that, Malusolongwe, that we don't look at these issues in a superficial level, but we go deeper, so that your creation may be restored, so that we may see each other as your creation and as equals. May we not just digest and leave it there, but may we, after reflecting and unlearning, allow ourselves to get into a process of learning anew and be agents of change. Sebenza Thixo, fikelele ezinhliziyweni zethu ukuthi nabo bazayibukela later on nabo basebenze Thixo mhlophe mengokulunga. Hlala nathi ke Nkosi, usigcine usilondoloze ngamaxesha onke igama elihle lomfeni nomvuko lwami Yesu Kristu. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, Brother Kaya. And today was the 4th day of the build-up towards the conference that the Contextual is having. Is the current Contextual is led by Brother Kaya class. And today we're having another session with Brother Lihlonolo Lipele. He'll be speaking on leadership and opportunity for growth. Please join us tomorrow again at 6 p.m. and engage on this topic. Gather your thoughts around leadership and how we can grow as young people of the Methodist Church who are to go out there in the world and build a better society. From me, your host is Aspingo Simdingi. Thank you for tuning in. Please continue to sanitize, social distance, wear your mask, and make sure that you protect everyone. For those who have decided to vaccinate, please go on different vaccination points. For those who are still deciding, please make your decision, but at the same time, please keep on keeping others safe and yourself until you get to that decision on how you want to move on about vaccinating. So everyone, we still need it for a bigger fight into our communities. So we don't need to lose more people. We can all fight this together. For me, good night. Thank you.